Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it another minute or so for a few more members to arrive, and then we'll get started.
Presentation.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on FY 2021 overview and highlights of proposed budgets. Let's start with a roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Allard? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Perez-Verdia? Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton? And Ms. Zalatel?
Here.
Thank you. Okay, so as usual, if assembly members want to get in the queue, please either put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't access the chat. All right, so we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Wilbur for the presentation. For members of the public or others, the presentation is on the Assembly website, muni.org/assembly, and you can go to our work sessions page. Go ahead, Mr. Wilbur.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. I appreciate your time today. We have this work session is scheduled from 1 to 3 o'clock, and we will be reviewing the general government operating budget, the capital budget for general government, and the utilities. So I'm going to ask, I have Lila with me. She's helping me manage the slide deck. So I'm going to ask that we bring the presentation up here. All right. So hopefully all of you have received a copy of the budgets. We delivered those to the clerk's office last Friday, October 2nd, and you should have received 3 documents, the 3 budget books themselves. And today's presentation is overview and highlights of those. We will not be talking a lot about details, but I do want to bring out some key points that the administration is proposing in all of these budgets. You know, when we built this budget, the administration was maintaining its desires and its needs to prioritize public safety and public health as we looked to 2021. And as we'll talk about, our continued support for police and fire will be illustrated in the budget as well as the desires and the proposals to increase the capacity of the health department, while most of that is being done with the alcohol tax, and we will talk a little bit about that as well. And as we built the proposed budget, you know, we're continuing to provide responses to COVID. We see a key responsibility not only in the activities, but also in our budgeting processes. And while we've been doing that for 2020, we're also going to be looking to do that in 2021. And at the same time, we are mindful that it's very important to provide the essential services that the citizens of Anchorage and the municipality require: street maintenance, whether it would be transit service, or whether it's support over the Permit and Development Center. All of those things are important that we maintain those services as well. And we also recognize that while it's not service related, it does impact the administration with the guidance of Alex Slifka, the CFO, and his team. We continue to maintain our AAA bond rating, and that is important because it saves us money. It saves us in money in two ways. One, the cost of debt is down, so that's a less of a burden to the taxpayers, and also we save money when we want to issue general obligation bond debt, which we will be proposing as part of the 2021 budget. So that is also very important. And doing all of that really at the face of, well, we have some revenue challenges that are really no secret, not only this year and next year. So through this process, I'm going to highlight the activities that we are proposed in this budget. And I'm going to start with sort of the budget environment that we are in. Building a budget in a pandemic, at least right now, and predictable projections into the near future, there's a lot of unknowns. And while we are looking at projecting the things that we can control, there are some things that we have done our best to make some estimated projections into the future. There's always, and there will be, the necessity to probably adjust some of these things. We will look to the first quarter in April to make those adjustments. But the projections that we make on our revenue side are really at a point in time when we propose this budget. The information will be changed, whether there are activities or actions at a federal level or at a state level, and how those things could impact how we manage our budget into 21. We're also recognition of the receipt and the allocation of the CARES funds. We continue to make every effort possible to push those funds out to the community so where they can do the most good, and the services and the support necessary in the general government side, whether it's in the health department or in the finance department or in the budget department or permit or OECD. Everybody has a role to make sure that those CARES funds get allocated. And again, the Assembly and their allocation of the CARES funds and the programming those, the administration's efforts to implement those plans are part of our continued budget. And then at the end, we still have to be flexible and the ability to modify if we need to do in the future. So we're aware of all of those things during this COVID pandemic timeframe and taking measures to build a budget that accounts for that. So the other thing that we also recognize is that while it's a small part now, we are continuing to see a decline in the revenue sharing. This year, we budgeted about $4.6 million. We'll probably receive roughly around $500,000. For 2021, it's really unknown whether the number will be the same. We did project less revenue sharing from the $4 million we have this year to a little under $2 million next year. And so obviously we'll be keeping an eye on that. If that number changes, we'll be making adjustments. The other thing that we also are aware of, this is the continuing changes in the state grant support and programs and projects. There's a lot of uncertainty and some unknown when it comes to how state grants are supporting not only our operating, but also our capital programs. And at times we have to be prepared to step in and address, and in some cases sort of mitigate the loss of that state support in the budget that we've got. So we are being mindful of that as well as we are putting this budget together. And then while there are many other pieces involved in the environment we're working in, we also look at how we are going to prepare this budget, the basic approach that we're taking, which is we start with this proposed budget with a general government continuation. And what that means is we take our 2020 budget and we make the necessary adjustments that are required by contracts, and whether they're labor contracts or contracts with vendors, software providers, leaseholders, whatever that might be, professional services contracts, we make sure that whatever obligations we have there, we show those as a continuation to next year. And many of those non-labor things, that some of them go up and some of them go down, but we do take those into account. But suffice it to say, for the 21 proposed budget, the overall continuation spending is a 0.8% difference going up. So it's basically flat from 2020 to 2021. And we'll talk a little bit more about what makes up the ingredients that got us to that point. So I'm going to start with the next 4 slides are really sort of a discussion about where we are in our revenue projections, some of the expected changes that we have and the commitments that we work with. When the Office of Management and Budget looks to prepare, we work very close with Treasury to see how are our projections going forward at the end of 2020. That helps us create the base, if you will, at least on the revenue side, on how we're going to go forward. So all funds considered in all areas, the total amount of revenues for the 2020 year end is going to be roughly a $24 million change. And that's a combination of non-tax revenues. It's also a combination of some tax revenues, and some of those may be inside the cap and some of those are outside the cap. That's going to include things like the room tax, revenue sharing, any reductions that we might have to the permit fees. We'll talk about some of these as well, but we know that those revenue projections overall for the entire budget are a little more than $24 million. The other things that we look at is we want to know how our debt service may turn out at the end of the year through a combination of refinancing or issuing debt. We do believe that we're going to end a little bit in a positive territory as it relates to our debt service. We're going to save a little money, a little more than $500,000 there. So that helps us this year. As part of the sale of municipal light and power, there really are sort of 2 categories of receipts of funds. One are from the proceeds and the other is from the MLMP department. The municipality is proposing that as part of our 2020 year end, we're proposing to put roughly $6 million of that into our fund balance from the MLMP cash. We're not able to do that from the proceeds, so this is particularly from the cash portion of the budget, from the MLMP. The next thing is, as a result of the CARES Act dollars, we are going to be moving public safety and first responder payroll charges from the 2020 operating budget and move those into CARES funds, which frees up some fund balance in 2020. So collectively, that's going to get us to a total net positive of roughly $8.2 million. The thing that I want to point out when we're looking at 2020, this does not include how departments are projected to end the year. Particularly in the 5 major funds. So at the end of the year, we look to see how all the departments are trending on their current budgets based on their current revenues and primarily on their spend. On your addendum to the agenda, you'll see kind of how we're doing as of the end of August, and we will have a 3rd quarter report to you after September closes. So I think what we're seeing right now is I'm cautiously optimistic. Right now, the spend is under a percentage of where they are in the year. We have some departments that are really, really close. We are keeping an eye on the police and the fire department. Those guys are doing the best they can to manage it, but overall, we're going to be keeping an eye on that. But I want to remind the Assembly and others who may be listening in, when we get to the end of the year, we will true up our expenses. And if there's an opportunity that provides additional savings as the result of 2020, we will then include those in the conversation for the 2021 1st quarter revisions. So that's kind of the first stop process in the fund balance projections as it relates to the revenue side. So then what we work very
Before
closely.
you continue, Mr. Wilbur,
Yeah.
just a few things. So first, want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Perez Verdia, and then Ms. Zolotel is in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilbur, on that last slide, I'm a little concerned that that seems to be a bit misleading, since the CARES Act funds, actually a majority of those have been, I guess for lack of a better word, assigned to particular projects and not meant to replace revenue deficits. So okay, so that context isn't really projected in that slide. So I guess I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page.
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember Zalatel. I think what I was trying to illustrate there, as a result of, and it might have been a poor choice of words, but really where we're seeing those dollars to promote into that would come back into general government is when we move the costs of first responders to the CARES Act funds. That will free up the dollars that we programmed back into fund balance. So I'll think about a better way to illustrate that. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. So the next piece of the step in the development of the budget process is we look at our 2020 revenues. And this, again, as I mentioned, is a combination of the non-tax revenues. Those are going to be things that go in and out. One of the positives in there when we collect them all together is that negative $10.5 million does account for the contributions, the additional contributions that we'll be putting into the trust from the sale MMLP. But we also have to recognize, as you'll see as we move up, we also, in this category, we typically get a dividend from the utilities. For AWWU, that will not be the case this year, which is a loss of about $1.6 million. And we'll explain why that has to happen when we get there. We also know that the ambulance service fees that we receive we also were getting less transports. And then the assumptions that we are going to be receiving federal dollars to recover some of the supplemental emergency transports through Medicaid. We were anticipating receiving up to $2 million in those, or up to $3 million in the past. We don't anticipate that will become the case. So we're looking at a loss in the revenue projections there. We're also going to see some reductions in the amount of state fines, traffic fines and court fines that the municipality might be receiving through any garnishments through the PFD. Those, it's pretty small. Our investment incomes will down a little bit. And then while it's not a significant amount of money, it is a little over $1.5 million of that 10 million. The changes that we make in the fees and permits and changes in development services, those do accumulate to lost revenues that we'd use to support that portion of the business, which is also very important. In the non-property tax revenues, so the ones above it, those are not taxed. Those are fines, fees, permits, whatever it might be, revenue coming in from other sources. We also receive non-property tax revenues, and they'll, in this illustration, try to show them that we get non-property tax revenues that are inside the cap and outside the cap. Primarily the one that's outside the cap is the bed tax. So 9 million of that 10 million is the bed tax. So obviously, and this is all funds again, so that's 90% of the tax revenues that are outside the cap that we are aware that's going to be that we need to address. So inside the cap, there are basically 7 other categories of funds that we get that make up funds inside the cap. And so everything from the auto tax, tobacco, aircraft, marijuana, motor vehicle fuel, a couple others. The net effect of all of those is a negative $2.5 million. I think the biggest contributor to that is really the loss in the motor vehicle rental tax. I mean, that's in concert with the loss in the room tax. So the key to this point is I want to make 2 observations. One is for every dollar that that group of taxes goes down, the property tax piece closes that gap. There'll be other things that we'll talk about in the tax cap calculation that can influence the tax cap, but inside the tax cap, we have a loss of revenue in those categories. The second piece I want to point out is that the tobacco tax is inside the tax cap. So right now in this proposed budget, we did not assume any additional increases to the tobacco tax due to vaping or e-cigs. So the Assembly passes that ordinance that would adjust those revenues to the tobacco tax in that category. That would bring another $800 or $700,000 or $800,000 inside the cap. It does not provide more money, but it will provide property tax relief. So that $2.5 million will go down, and that will provide property tax relief to that amount to the property taxpayers. Again, there are other influences in there, but I just wanted the Assembly to be aware that this calculation does not include the e-cig or the vaping tax as part of tobacco. Obviously, if the Assembly takes action to include that and we have a start date before we approve the budget in November, we'll make adjustments. And if not, then we'll make adjustments in first quarter. So the last piece is when we look at all of our revenue changes, we look at the total amount of property taxes at $8.4 million. Now that $8.4 million includes the property taxes inside the 5 major funds. I think as the Assembly looks at fund balance and setting the tax cap, we look at the 5 major funds. 7.8 million, and that number will come back, you'll see that later, is in those 5 majors. The other 600,000 is a property tax increase from the service areas. But we account for all of that because it's part of our total budget. So service areas up on the hillside, limited road service areas, whether the Chugiak Eagle River Rural Road Service Area, if they want to adjust their taxes, or the service areas out there, any of those 30-some service areas, we include those based on what we have now. It's probably the one thing that requires the most truing up when we get into first quarter. So the net effect of all of our revenue changes inside 21 is a projection of about $15 million into a deficit when we go through. So I think the next slide I want to show is just kind of maybe reiterate some of the key places where.
Actually, sorry, before you go on, I have a question for you from Mr. Dunbar.
Mr. Dunbar, please.
I'm sorry, Lance. Actually, now, my question is for this slide. You're about to. It's in regards to room tax. So let me hear this slide first, and then.
Okay.
And maybe also have a question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So, again, we're looking at all funds in all of these places. So this is really sort of the net, and these are really big. These are some of the key changes. These are not all of the changes. They are reflected in your budget book. There's a revenue section in your budget book if you're particularly in any one, if you want to know if it's going up or it's going down. Look in the budget book, or give us a call, send us an email, let us know what your interests are, and we will respond to you there. But I put this slide in here not so much to be repetitive, but just to more sort of emphasize where I think some of these key changes are. So in the municipal trust, I mentioned this is a combination of the amount of money that we will put into the trust as a result of the proceeds from the MLMP sale, plus the increase that we would see from the trust based on the money that's already in it. So the net of that is about $4.2 million based on the projections now. If the contribution into the trust from MLMP at the end of the day is slightly more, then obviously the amount of return will be more. The room tax, now that's a total of $9.6 million. Now that room tax, it's really sort of divided in 3 different categories. There's roughly $3 million that goes in to support general government, roughly $3 million that goes in to pay the debt on the Denina Center, and roughly $3 million that goes in to support the visitor and tourist industry through a contribution. So that's the total amount of money there. The contributions from the other funds, as I mentioned, the net change in all of those things, as I mentioned, whether they be in fines or fees or from other services, utility contributions. I singled out the utilities separately here. I mentioned that revenue sharing. Right now, we are budgeting roughly $4.6 million. We're going to budget should be $2.5 million less than that as the legislature gets into session and they pass their budget. If we need to make adjustments there, we will. I mentioned that the ambulance transports in total are down. That's an important element here. It's a little bit of reduction in the transports themselves, but primarily the change is the schedule that we now are anticipating at a state level, in which we will be able to seek the reimbursements for Medicaid transports that are currently not paid for. So it's possible those may come in sooner, but the last year we were anticipating $3 million. The state process has slowed that down. So we are not going to accommodate all of it. Obviously, if we receive it, we'll make the adjustments. We'll talk a little bit about the change in the AWU dividend. We are still going to get dividends from the port and solid waste. Investment income's down a little bit. I mean, obviously that one changes by quarter. So in Dan and Ross's team, when we are looking at the investment income, those numbers could be changing, but again, at a point in time, building permits and then the exemption review, the amount of revenue that we might receive as a result of the exemption review, most of this had to do with people claiming a residential exemption that weren't here anymore. So again, the net of all of those things, plus a bunch of others, that gets us to our roughly $20 million over $23 million reduction. So I don't know if I answered Mr. Dunbar's question with that overview, or if Mr. Dunbar, if you had another question related to this.
I do, Mr. Chair, if it's all right.
Go ahead.
So I apologize to my colleagues and to the administration. This is going to be a little bit of a soliloquy before the question. But I think that this is an important place to start framing this discussion. And it's around the $9.6 million reduction in the room tax and in the, let's see, is it on here? The money that we receive from the state. Let's say it's part of contributions from other funds. No, I'm sorry, revenue sharing.
Correct.
And there's nothing on this revenue projection that relates to funds we might receive in a second COVID-19 relief bill that could pass the Congress in the coming months. So today, the President Trump, announced that he wanted a larger package than what Speaker Pelosi was pushing for, which is why their negotiations failed. He's also stated repeatedly that a vaccine is just around the corner. So if you believe the president, we should have either one of two things, either a much improved health situation by next summer, or a very large COVID-19 relief bill that will pass. Now, if he doesn't get reelected, the Biden administration has also, or the incoming Biden administration has also made clear that CARES Act package is their highest priority, or one of their highest priorities. And so I guess, and then further to that, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that there will be pent up demand for travel and for vacations next summer if the health situation improves, which would lead to a larger improvement in the room tax. And so I guess my question is for you, or for Dan from Treasury, if he's on, how did you factor in those kind of national moves and national statements and national political strategies that should unspool in the next 3 to 4 months? How do you put them into a projection like this?
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Dunbar. I'll start with that one. So we don't project or predict kind of how Congress or the president or the state actually might act. As I mentioned, and when we do these projections, we take them at a point in time. As new information comes in, like the news that was evident today, depending on when that timing might be, I will say that on the room tax, we looked to a couple sources. One, we looked to the projections from the visitor industry. We looked to the projections from the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. We also take into account the projections on the current, and if we see any upticks on those things, I'll say it's we took I won't say it's very conservative, but it is conservative. We do expect it to pick up a little bit in 2021, but we don't expect it to be where we started in 2020. So if we budgeted a certain amount of room tax coming in at 9 million, we projected that or actually the room tax, I think it's a total of about 30 million. So, you know, we did not expect it to come for a full recovery here. And so, Mr. Dunbar, to your point, if it does get better between now and our projections, and we are confident in those projections, then we will adjust. But right now, I will say that they are moderately conservative.
Can I really quickly follow up to that, Mr. Rivera?
Sure.
So I just think I'm sort of making a case for optimism here. And I understand why you have been so conservative. But I also think that we're going to be potentially making some tough decisions about what to cut in the coming weeks and months. And I would hate to see a program be cut when sometimes we cut things and it's relatively difficult to get them reinstated. And perhaps we will be able to come first quarter budget revisions. But I'm just worried about us being overly conservative with our projection towards next year. Again, if you take the president, his statements at face value. And if you don't believe the president, then fair enough, that this is probably appropriate. But he has stated over and over that things are going to get much better in the near future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schutte?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you can hear me okay. I just would like to add to what Mr. Wilbur stated, that there are two factors to remember in the room tax in response to the optimism that Mr. Dunbar expressed. And the first is the CARES Act dollars, at least thus far, have not been allowed to go towards revenue replacement for local governments. And so that's, without knowing anything about the massive deal that's apparently being cooked up, I think it's probably worth noting that at least up until now, that has been the case. And then secondly, I like the optimism. I too am optimistic. We have to remember that room tax is a product not just of quantity, but also of price. And that's something that we've seen this season in particular, where the rooms that are vacant have actually been lower than we would have expected given a pandemic, but the price per room is what's bottomed out. And it's a dual function, not just of visitor traffic. So if a vaccine is out and there's pent up demand for people to travel, that's great, but it's also a product of price. And so without being able to 100% accurately predict both the occupancy and the price per room, I do think that this is a reasonable starting point heading into 21. Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, then the point I want to talk about is, and we talked a little bit at sort of how we got to a point of looking at projections for our revenues, and I think the comments made by Mr. Schutte and the assembly members about potential change, obviously that was kind of the difficult part, or the challenging part about all of the revenues. There are some that are constant, but there are some that can swing, and so we are definitely keeping an eye on them all the time. So the next part I want to talk about is sort of how we do a 21 budget, and as we look forward to our commitments. So we look at some of the changes that we are required to make, and the first one, not necessarily in particular order, but the first one is labor. And we look at our labor changes that we have from 20 to 21. And that's $7 million. It's a combination of continuation. We look at our existing municipal employees. This is just in general government again. We look at what their collective bargaining units might require, any changes that might be in their medical contributions. And I'll say on the salary side, most of the salary increases in the existing bargaining units are from 0 to 1.2% in 2021. There are some other changes that we've made in here. We had some positions that departments decided to hold back as a one-time in 2020. We put those departments back in 2021, and they did those as a cost savings then and do some changes in services. I think on the labor side, the thing that I do want to point out is that with all of the labor adjustments that we've made, the one decision that was made in this proposed budget is that the executives and the non-representative employees will remain flat for 2021. There'll be no, their salaries will continue at the current level. There'll be no adjustments at least in this proposed budget. We've had some other changes in there, some contributions to PERS that we have to make sure that we make commitments to. So that gives us a labor increase of about 7 million, roughly 4.5 of that is in salaries. We also had some net changes overall in our non-labor. In our non-labor, in the first quarter budget revisions, we took out dollars for fuel, we took out dollars for travel. We had some incremental adjustments for salary or settlement recovery, but we also had some changes as it relates to contractual obligations. We have to increase for a slight increase for police and fire retirement. Suffice to say, when you took all of the non-labor, the pluses and the minuses, including the contracts and leases and the commitments that we are going to do, the net effect of that is a reduction in the non-labor across all general government by a little bit more than $1 million. In 21, the debt service, we look to, there's going to be some adjustments in the debt service. I think some of that has to primarily related to the changes in contributions into the debt for SAP. So, and then we also have CAMA, which will be kicking on, I think, as part of that as well. The other thing that you will see in the departments is we are making some transfers. So you'll see some organizational change in departments. So when we talk to position counts, you'll see some, they're relatively minor, but there's really only about 3 or 4 of them. One of them is in payroll. So currently payroll is in the Human Resources Department. For 2021, the administration is proposing to move payroll into IT. A lot of the payroll work that's being done and the improvements that are being made are related to technology. And so Susie and her team have been managing that and making those fixes and making those changes. And so the administration is going to move that into HR or move that into IT. A couple small things. Currently, the cemetery is housed in the health department. It will be moved to Parks and Rec. So when you look at those departments, you're going to see about a $500,000 swing, one going down, one coming up. Overall, in general government, there's a no net change, but inside those departments, it is a change. And then the other thing that we'll see, while it's not necessarily a transfer, and you'll see these on the reconciliation for departments, is that in departments overtime, we did not increase any department's overtime budget, but what we did do is we separated out that portion of their overtime budget that's going to salaries and that's going to benefits. It's not a total net increase. It's just that when departments have when they're tracking their overtime costs, the number that they're using right now is basically all parked in salaries. So we clean that up and making sure that appropriately the amount goes to, because overtime does charge the salaries and benefits. So those are some of the sort of cleanup things that we made. The total net effect of all of those commitments, and again, this is basically in rounding, is roughly about almost a $6 million increase when you take the pluses and the minuses. Some of the highlights in the changes there, I want to point out, again, I mentioned the administration's priorities in public safety. There's a lot to mention here. The public safety, the academies, the continuation of the academies are in the proposed budget. You won't see any pluses or minuses. They're a continuation. There are no proposed staffing changes, pluses or minuses in public safety. They're a continuation in their current staff levels. Under the housing and homelessness, the homelessness and behavioral health and some of that systems, we have some continued support there. A portion of that is with general government, and a portion of that will be with the alcohol tax, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The mobile intervention team, that is maintained as a continuation at its current level and its current funding, current staffing in 2021. Contributions to shelter match, so you'll see some dollars in there. The one other, I think a change that maybe some of you have recognized in reviewing the alcohol tax in the Parks and Rec Department, we are going to go to a year-round services for camp cleanup and abatement. That will be an increase of about $700,000 in the Parks Department through contributions from the alcohol tax as proposed. And then in addition to a continuation service, property appraisal is probably one of the big things that you will see in our continuation. Leases, contracts, mostly in Robin Ward's shop. You'll see some contract changes, some support to the fire department for their physicals, some support to a little bit of support to the police department on some of their contractual obligations. And then one of the things that we really wanted to figure out a way to tackle that we still need to kind of close the gap on is how we are going to be replacing our aging fleet with the resources constraints that we have right now. What we're going to be able to do is, we have to increase our parts budget a little bit to help Alan Chkowski out on the maintenance side. So you'll see some adjustments in there. Okay. So the next group of slides are really sort of the summary of the budget. And in the general government book, the overview section, these graphics are taken from there. So I'm going to highlight some of the changes here. So in order to create a balanced budget, the order of the slides here are, first we're going to talk about funding sources, and then we'll talk about funding uses. The order is a little different in the document, but again, this is all taxes, all service areas, all funds. This is not just the 5 major funds. So when you include the service areas and general government, the total property taxes make up about $320 million, which is about roughly 58% of our total resources that we're getting in. The next category between the 7 and 8, those are those taxes that we talked about that are inside the cap. So as that pie gets a little bit bigger, the blue pie gets a little bit smaller. And then, the going around the contributions and transfers from others, that's really trust and dividends. It's going down a little bit. The state revenue sharing is affecting the state and revenue contributions. We talked a little bit about that. The fees and license and permits, the bulk of the reduction of about $4 million there. Most half of it is in the ambulance piece. Fines and fees is down not quite $500,000 as you'll see, but the total amount of 5.6. And then interest income, it's down a little bit, but that's a combination of how we're doing on investments in our cash pool, our bond sales, and things like that. Intergovernmental charges, that makes up a variety of things. That can include our charges to capital projects, that could include charges to grants, whether we charges to the utilities for the services in finance and pay and purchasing and payroll. Those are charges, revenues coming in from those utilities for the central service we provide to them. It also can include a variety of other things. On the fund balance, again, this is all funds. The fund balance for the 5 majors, we mentioned earlier, of that 17 million, roughly 8.5 of it is in the 5 major funds. The other 9 million that makes up that 17, that's fund balance that's being used from things from the building service safety area, or maybe a little bit of fund balance from the public finance investments. the convention center. There may be some funds from HLB where they use their dollars to manage and maintain property. Doesn't affect the property taxes, but it's a fund that we have to recognize there. So a lot of information and some detail, but that's sort of the highlight of the variety of sources we have coming in from all different areas. So the next is, where do all of those dollars go in all across the general government? So again, about 56% of it, that's pretty constant, about 308 million. Again, this includes the service areas, is going into personnel. And then supplies is pretty small. Travel is very small. The other services, to remind the Assembly, this is utility bills that we pay, contracts that we have, lease payments, contributions to the Police and Fire Retirement Fund, any management costs to other facilities. This would include our contributions to support and operate the PAC, the museum. It also includes all of the limited road service areas. They contract out the dollars and they go to their own direct services. So it's money in the door from them, goes to their contractors, but it's part of the other services. A lot of limited road service area dollars in there. And then debt, voter approved GO debt is part of that. Any lease agreements that we might have or purchase agreements we have, they will be included in debt. And then depreciation, while it's not appropriated, we do account for it. So the total there is the $548 million. Just real brief, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but it has garnered some interest in the past. I don't think there's really no changes. As I mentioned earlier, the percentage change in the total spend of the budget in general government is 0.8%. We are not cutting services across general government. And frankly, the only place we will be proposing any services, there's a couple places in general government, but most of it has to relation to the alcohol tax. But again, police and fire, our commitments to public safety, it's going to consume roughly 40% of our overall budget. And if you look to the categories on the right side of the column, if you added everything from the library to the new Department of Equity and Justice, it doesn't equal 10% of the total budget. So again, you won't see any wild swings in here. We've really kept it consistent and as we possibly could, as much of the services related to general government. This chart here shows the total amount of position count. While we are adding a total of 3 positions, one of them will be a position in development services to help with their public counter and their customer service. We're going to add a position to the Human Resources Department to address classification. And then we are going to be adding a new position in the Department of Equity and Justice. But there are other departments that are reducing or making changes in their personnel that might carry over from last year to this year. The net effect of all of that is a +2 in the position count. So as you look through these, if you have questions about the changes, please let me know or reach out to the departments and we can offer some help.
Before you move on, I do have a question from Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. On these positions, does this include those that are contemplated to be paid for through alcohol tax dollars?
It does not. It does not.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification. So these are just those that are currently in the general government. You'll see some, as I mentioned, you'll see some positions as they relate to the payroll where they're moving from one to the others, but these do not include the positions for the alcohol tax. And we made a conscious effort and we had some discussion about how best to illustrate those positions. So instead of sort of blending them in so they might be confused with existing services, for this proposal, we put them separately in a different appendix. And so those positions would be in addition to if they're supported by the Assembly. And so, but for this purpose, we kept them separate so that you could see specifically and clearly where we're proposing those for alcohol tax.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the overall summary of all of the things that we talked about as they relate to the revenue, as they relate to our expenses, as they relate to the changes in the taxes that we might have. So when we look at the budget that the Assembly approved in 2020, we compare our first quarter budget revisions. Then that is sort of the base that we start to build 21. That's where we start our base for our labor changes, our revenue changes, our expenses, our non-labor. That's the point in time which we make the adjustment. This proposed budget would increase that amount by about $5.7 million in general government. So that is about a 0.8%. The total position count, it's going to go up 2, and they are in the non-public safety areas. On the property taxes, as I mentioned, at this point in time, based on the current assessed valuations and the current revenue projections of those inside the cap, and again, this does not account for any adjustments that we might have for tobacco. The amount of the adjustment in the property taxes would be up about $7.8 million, which is roughly a 2.7% increase. And that is in those 5 major areas. The effect of that would be, at this point, the net change would be roughly about $100 to an average $350,000 home. And again, these numbers will change as we get into closing 2020. We get a revised property assessed valuation. We get revisions to any adjustments that we might make as a result of some of the comments that Mr. Dunbar made and some of the changes that we might make in other places. So that's kind of where we are in the summary of the budget. So, Mr. Chairman, I think the next couple slides I want to talk about, I'm going to start off with the capital budget. This is a separate document that the Assembly will be taking action on. Well, the document that you have has the 2021 capital improvement budget. It also includes the 2021 to 2026 capital improvement program. And I really, when we built this, we recognized the fiscal climate that we're in, sort of the unpredictability about some of the things that might change to the positive, hopefully. What we put together here is a capital budget that's less than we had last year. And this will be the proposal for the 21 bonds. This is by department. Obviously, the bond proposals will be different because there are some of these services that are area wide and some of them that are specific. But by department, if you look at it, for the fire department, there's a total of about $2.5 million. They got a little bit of facility work, a ladder truck. The fire department has been over the years making transitions to, instead of replacing entire vehicles, they're replacing chassis. And so they are in this transition, and this year they sort of get a 2-for-1 by replacing a couple chassis and keeping the box on the back. We basically get 3 vehicles, so that's a good thing there. For the library, there's some improvements that the library would like to make to the Alaska room. The library is actively looking at matching funds from nonprofits that would shore up those dollars. We'll know, I think, by the end of December, early January, whether those matching funds are going to come to fruition, which will help tell us whether or not this $500,000 will help us in our library improvements in the Alaska room. The maintenance and operations department, when you look at this, you're basically going to see a lot of general capital maintenance in our existing municipal facilities. It's also going to include some improvements to our area-wide communication system. We've been working on it for 3 years now. It's complementary to the work that the state is doing at a statewide level. This provides some interoperable communication with both state and federal levels inside the municipality. But what you're going to see in there is some work for the senior centers. The Chugiak Senior Center would like to make some expansions to the work and the living facilities out there. So you'll see a first round of design hit to figure out what they actually can do. We know that we're going to have to manage some of their on-site systems in order to accommodate some of that. You'll see a modest, I think it's about $2.5 million in maintenance and operations for the existing health building. The future plans for the health department as they look to improve their existing facility, or whether they make there's an opportunity to move them. In the short term, we still need to make sure that their heating system and immediate safety and security needs are met. I think Deanne Fetko pointed this out when she shared some of the information to the Assembly's Health Policy Committee. The other thing that's included is last year there was a vote to the Anchorage residents and Girdwood to improve the Little Bears and Glacier Valley City Hall about 2.5 or 2.2. This year it's down a little bit, 2.1. That will be part of this. Again, that'll be a separate bond proposition. We'll talk about more about that as we get into that. Parks and Recreation, we'll talk about those projects when we get to the departments, pretty much the same. Jamie over at Public Transportation, that's a 6-to-1 match. That's getting us over $7 million in dollars there. And then roads and traffic, we'll talk as we get to the departments some detail about this. But the total amount of proposed bonds is roughly $56 million. I will verify with Alex and team, but as I remember, the amount of debt that we're retiring is roughly, I think, between 34 and 36 million. That's going to be equivalent to probably and if that's 20-year-old debt, that's going to be roughly $52 to $54 million in today's dollar value. So we'll provide some more of that information when we get into the details, when we get into that presentation for the departments and the overall bonds.
Thank you. I have a question for you from Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on the previous slide there, Lance, you mostly addressed it, but I guess I wanted to flag this for you and for the department when we get deeper into the capital budget. When I was reading through the packet, one of the items that did jump out to me was that $2.5 million investment in the Anchorage Health Facility. And I'm wondering if that is sort of an admission from the administration that we do not think the TED project, the Tudor Elmore Development Project, is going to happen. Because to me, that does seem like a very sizable investment in a building that initially was planned to be knocked down entirely. And then the next proposal was it was going to be basically gutted and turned into a senior center. So yeah, you can answer that now. I think Mr. Schutte has his hand up, or we can wait for the more detailed presentation when we get to the capital budgets. Thank you.
I would, unless I'll start.
I'm happy to go.
We take the time to talk about that when we talk about the health department and the capital budget. But yes, there are some changes that we need to make and some immediate needs that we need to address at the health department. But the overall plan, I'll let Mr. Schutte address that.
Thank you, Lance, and through the chair, Assemblymember Dunbar. The changes that are proposed through this capital program are really the critical facility needs that we just can't ignore. And they do have a long-term value to the existing health department building, so that if somewhere down the road it becomes, I think you said, a senior center or some other use, the types of improvements that we're looking at making are valuable to that down the road. The building is not slated to be demolished. Turns out that it's built like a brick house, and that it's more costly to try and blow that thing up than it is to use the existing frame and just reconstruct. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just want to note for the record, Mr. Slivka made a comment that Mr. Wilbur was correct about the debt earlier. Mr. Wilbur made a comment about that. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, thanks. couple questions. One is, have you accounted for the school district expects to have significantly lower attendance, which means their money from the state will go down, which means the money that we're allowed to give them will go down. And then also the transit got 18 million in CARES Act funds. It didn't seem too restrictive to me, and I wonder if that can be used for that match.
That's a good question, Mr. Weddleton. I will have to find out. I will, on the transit side, that's a great question for Ms. Acton. As far as the states in relation to the school district, this is all general obligation bonds. We did not consider any of the changes that the state might influence the school district's operating budget. I did hear from Mr. Ratliff yesterday in a briefing to the Budget Advisory Commission about their concerns about the future revenues at the school district, but he didn't talk much about their capital program. As I recall, they had a large bond, and next year there will be no bonds for the school district.
Okay, I wasn't really thinking so much about the capital budget. I just
Okay.
was waiting for your whole thing. So, but from our side, you know, we can only give X amount based on what their BSA is, and if that drops, or maybe it's not the BSA, but the sum total,
Right.
that drops, and what we're seeing is significant. That could free up millions for us. I think that happened to us a couple of years ago, and it was not nearly as significant.
That is true. And that will be reflective in our tax cap calculation. Right now, we made an assumption based on what we know at that point in time, but you're exactly right, Mr. Weddleton. The actions of the state that influence the school district could influence us. And we will know that when we set the taxes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wait till April. Thanks.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure what match Mr. Weddleton was referring to there, but I do know that you can't match federal money with federal money.
We matched FEMA money with CARES Act money.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I only have one brief slide on the alcohol tax, and I know that there's been a lot of discussion, but as Assemblymember Zalatel mentioned, outside of the general government proposal that we talked about, all of the summary slides that we talked about, that is all separate from the proposal from the alcohol tax. Because as you recall, and members of the Assembly are well aware, but others, just as a reminder, the alcohol tax can only be used for specific things, as I sort of summarized here, and it can only be used in these things that are above and beyond what we already have planned in 2020. So if we are going to increase our first responders as they relate to that we currently have in police or any of those areas, increase the services to any program that would combat child abuse or sexual assault, domestic violence, anything that would relate to treatment or homelessness, mental health, substance abuse above what we already do. And I think this is really where we're going to be, you'll see some increases in the health department. And so this is the key changes that you'll see there. And then the alcohol tax does allow us to apply revenues from there for administrative purposes, collection, and this is really all in the Treasury Department. So Appendix R, if you are not aware, is that was our proposal to illustrate the tax. We tried to summarize what it could be used for. We want to make it clear that it can't be used to supplant current dollars for current programs, whether it be in OMB or in planning or in development services or anywhere. It can only be used to add services that support those categories there. So that is what we have in Appendix R. It's separate. And I think that we will talk more about that when we get to the departments in the details for each one of those budgets. So I did want to just highlight that for the Assembly members. As many of you have already recognized, it's not blended in, it is separate of. So the last a couple slides here, Mr. Chairman, are really related to the utilities. And before I sort of talk about the changes, I want to talk about some of the look and the overall global changes that we made to the proposed utility budget and enterprise. We did a couple things. One of them is we changed the look inside the book itself so that it looks more consistent with how you compare one year to the other, as you're most familiar with in general government. So when you look at the departments that we have in there, you're going to see a reconciliation pages from a change from one year to the next. It looks very similar to general government. The reconciliation pages and their revenue pages, we tried to make them look consistent in their presentation. We've also been able to add a lot more information about their capital budget. Normally, we just had one line or one word descriptions of something. The utilities were very supportive in their giving us more information about the capital budget for the year that they are going to be doing things and looking into the out year. So it looks a lot more like our general government capital budget in its presentation. So hopefully you'll find that helpful and a little bit more informative than we had in the past. Overall, the utilities, they're continuing to do the amazing things that they do. The couple things that are super important, and I repeat this every year, these utility and enterprise budgets, these departments, they're self-sufficient. Tax dollars do not go to support our utility and enterprise. And I think we get some questions in the past. Maybe there's some concerns and we need to make it clearer, why are our tax dollars going up to support one of these entities? And they don't to support these entities. They're self-sufficient. So, the service that they provide, whether it's in the clean water or waste management, transportation, marine or air, they just do an amazing job. And I think they've done a great job in 21 overall. And when you see the 21 book, you're going to notice probably two things that I want to point out. One of them is you will not see municipal light and power in this proposed book. However, what you will see is you will see a utility called Anchorage Hydropower. And Anchorage Hydropower is a byproduct of the sale of MLMP. It is a requirement that was identified in the transactions and the sale of MLMP, where we will have a partial ownership of a hydropower utility at Clutna. Our participation in that will require involvement in how that hydropower is operated, how the investments will occur, the sale of the electric from that hydropower. Where do those dollars? The sale of the power to CEA or MEA, the distribution of those proceeds coming into general government or to support other services. They're identified in there. So you'll see, right now in the proposal, there's no positions identified, obviously no rate increases because it's brand new. We do have to maintain some capital reserve, which is about $3 million in their reserve fund. But we also have to make sure that we are programming a little bit of money, and we worked with Anna Henderson and the folks that were involved in the transition documents. Members of my team were heavily involved in this as well. So this is the proposal that we have. As that shores up and shapes up in 21, we learn a little bit more about it. We may make some adjustments there. In AWU, I think this is the one thing that we'll talk a little bit more about in detail, but I'll just summarize that. I think this is the first time that I can recall that AWU has actually reduced their budget. Their revenues, they are very mindful of the revenues that they are not seeing as a result of ratepayers. While they may be seeing more revenues in water at the residential side, their commercial side is going down. So they also have to be very relevant and mindful of the amount of debt that they have and the amount of cash that they have on hand. In order to keep that balance in play, they are reducing their expenses significantly in this proposed budget. if the revenues do turn around, or there's some program that allows AWU to recover revenues from individuals, whether they are homeowners or businesses that were not able to pay their utilities or are late on their utility payments, those lost revenues could then potentially be realized, and we will make some adjustments in first quarter. But those lost revenues are a direct byproduct of the utility not being able to, at least on the calculations we have, their inability to pay a dividend in this proposed budget. If things turn around, things shape up, we will be making some changes in first quarter, and we'll talk more about that with Mr. Corsentino and his finance team when we get a review of the utility budgets in the 23rd. They do have some proposed rate increases, and we'll talk about that. And then over at Merrill Field, really the change here on the capital budget, that capital budget is the FAA dollars that they have coming in the door. There's no rate increases for Merrill Field. They're going to continue to put those capital dollars in place. The rate increases that they had in last year in 2020, there's no adjustments proposed in 2021. So Mr. Gibbs and his team are going to be really focusing on what they can do. They've got some ideas to reinvest in some property. I think you saw on your docket that we're going to hopefully take over some simulators that will also improve the business over at Merrill Field, and we'll let Mr. Gibbs elaborate on that one. And then the last couple here at the port, there's really no significant changes in the port. You'll see in the capital budget or in their utilities and enterprise budgets, the progress that they're seeing on the phase one of the cement terminal, and you will really no changes in their personnel. I think in 2020, they moved some non-labor to labor, and so, or non-labor, labor to non-labor, so they made some adjustments in their personnel, very, very small, but we can talk some details. And then at SWS, really, they're going to move forward and continue their efforts, as we've been talking about in 2020, on their central transfer station, and all of the conversations that the Assembly Utility and Enterprise Committee, all the work sessions that we've had at SWS on their proposal to update and manage their transfer station to a tune of about $100 million. We also are aware that we're going to make some rate increases, so this should not be a surprise. We knew that this was going to be as part of the 21 requirements. So when you look at that budget, if you have questions or you're seeing things that you did not expect to see, please reach out to myself or Mr. Spafford and we'll get you addressed. So I think at the end of this, Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly, even given all of the uncertainty that we started this process with, all of the challenges that we have in our revenue, and knowing that we're going to have to make some adjustments, we're committed and continue to support these areas that I mentioned. In public safety, these have been things that the administration has been focused on and continues to do that. This 21 budget will include the alcohol tax that will take effect in February. So the expenses that we have there will kick in and take it for any services or activities that would be there. The thing that I didn't mention on the alcohol tax slide is that maybe some of you have already seen, while the dollar amount of the alcohol tax is projected to be $12 million, the administration's only proposed to allocate about 9.3 of that. Obviously, if the projections are coming in strong, we can take another look at that, but we took a more conservative approach and we are not programming all of those things. But I know that some others had some questions about that. Again, our investment in capital, we have to maintain our basic infrastructure that we have. In talking to the Planning and Zoning Commission on this matter, they recognize sort of the tolerance of our ability to bond for things in this particular environment. While there's a need to implement our comprehensive plans, implement and reinvestment downtown and reinvestment areas, we also have a need to maintain basic infrastructure, utility, pipes, roads, trails, parks, and those are the things that we're trying to do there. And at the end of the day, we have to give you, and as we have, a balanced budget. Our proposed projections and our proposed spend have to be to a zero. Where we give in one place, we will have to adjust in another. So again, I think that, if you have, as we work through the details. On the next slide. So where we are, while we gave you
Before
the
you
budget.
go on, I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Wilbur, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Lance, this is about the alcohol proposed, where the proposal to spend some of the alcohol tax. You've got an operations coordinator down here for a little over $100,000. And I thought we were planning to contract the treatment center out to be run by a nonprofit. So why are we having an operations coordinator here?
I will start, and then if Mr. Bockenstead is online, I'll ask him to jump in. You are right. The treatment center, I believe, at the end of the day, will be the service of that will be contracted out. There will obviously be some support to do that. Whether it's the treatment center or the shelters or any other program inside the alcohol tax, we still need to be able to coordinate with those contractors, those service providers, to make sure that they're meeting the agreements that we put together to manage those things, making sure that they're meeting their reporting requirements. So we still need some local in-house support to make sure that that those contractors or nonprofits are fulfilling the requirements that we ask of them, and thus we are asking or proposing that the alcohol tax be supporting that service to monitor those programs.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have two questions. So my first one, if we could go back a little bit to the AWWU utility budget, and there was the comment there about $0 for dividend. Can you remind me again how the dividend actually works, how the funds in the dividend are actually generated, and then what kind of requirements there are for how those are actually used? Who gets to take advantage of them, please?
So I will start, and then if I need some help, maybe either Mr. Corsentino, if he's on, or Marilyn, if she's on, I'll get an answer back to you. But basically, their ability to pay us a dividend is based on their revenue projections and their net position. If they are literally in a situation where their net position is potentially in a negative or going into a negative position, then they do not pay a dividend. And so I think that's probably the simplest. I can provide more information later unless Mr. Corsentino wants to jump on if he's listening, or
Yep, I am, Lance. You did answer it fairly well, close enough. It's our net income, and if we have low net income projected as we do, or we are not recommending it because of our deficient revenues. The other thing, just to note, it's important, is we actually, because we're economically regulated, we have a dividend restriction on the sewer utility. We can only pay a dividend on the water utility side. And again, if we are in a position where our revenues are down or our net income's down, we're not going to recommend it for budgetary reasons. And as Lance said, that's the short answer.
Okay, thank you. And if I could follow up on that, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And then that leads to the bigger question in this, and that is, so by what statutes or authority or policy has this idea of having to, or potentially being able to pay a dividend, that those funds would actually go to the municipality and not the ratepayers? So what's the arrangement there?
I think there's several policies, and what I would offer is we can probably consolidate those and offer them to you later, because they're a mixture of assembly ordinances, RCA filings, and a number of other scenarios. But it is highly scrutinized, but it's highly visible, probably not well known. So we can try to summarize that for you and provide that, if that's okay, at a later following this meeting.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely. Thank you. I'd be interested in seeing those details. Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, one more question, or you can
sure, go ahead.
Okay. This question probably goes back to Lance. I just wondered, you'd mentioned that this budget basically was $100, if I heard you correctly, was $100 increase per $100,000 worth of taxable value on
No.
property.
Oh, my mistake, Miss Kennedy. It's $100 for a $350,000 home. It's about $28 to $29 per 100,000.
Okay, great. Okay, well then that's I still have the same question though. Thanks for clarification on the numbers. And that is, how many millions would that take away from the projected budget if we were to basically have a budget that didn't increase any at all? If it wasn't even the $29 or whatever per 100,000, how many millions would that cost?
About 7.8 million.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just want to read a couple of comments into the record from Mr. Slivka. So the utility dividends are detailed by AO 2019-62, which amended AMC 26.10.065. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think where I want to close is just to remind the assemblies and those who may be listening or viewing kind of where we are. As I mentioned, we started off by presenting the budget as we were required by code on October 2nd. And so hopefully you've received those. I also wanted to mention in your capital budget, there is a map of where all of the proposed projects are going to be there. So hopefully that you find that useful as well. Again, this is an overview of the budget. We didn't get into a lot of details. We have two more work sessions scheduled. They're about 4 hours apiece. Next Friday, starting at 11, we will start with general government. My plan is to start with public safety and some of the larger departments, probably maintenance and operations. I will be sending out a schedule and working with Desiree, Barbara, and the departments on when to expect those, but it'll be similar to last year. We kind of ran over a little bit due to the interest in some departments, so obviously we'll be flexible, but that's where we're going to start. The first public hearing is on the 21st or on the 27th, and then we have a work session before that. The following, we're going to focus. We'll close up general operating budget. Expect those will be sort of central service departments. Most of the services inside this building, the assembly's budget to be included is probably where we'll touch that. And then we'll spend some time on the utilities. If we don't get to all of those, or you see some need for additional ones, then we will we'll work accordingly. As you know, but those who might be listening, since November 3rd, which is the second Tuesday of the month, is election day. We have an assembly meeting on the Wednesday, which is the 4th. That will be our second public hearing. And Mr. Chairman, and I took the liberty just to put a day on here and I had some conversations earlier when we set the schedule, probably a couple months ago, as the assembly is deliberating, closing, or taking action on the hearing public comment. Somewhere probably around the 10th is when the assembly has traditionally asked for their amendments. The 11th is a holiday. So obviously that is up to you as to when you want to have those amendments due to the assembly office. And then traditionally there's a work session. We have it scheduled for the 13th that day. That's when the assembly will contribute or consider any amendments they might have. If the administration has an S version to the capital budget or the operating budget based on the testimony, based on new information, then the administration would then hopefully prepare that available to you for consideration around the 13th. And then right now, the assembly is scheduled to approve the budget on the 17th of November, which is your last meeting in November. So that is the schedule ahead of us, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for your time. I don't have anything else to add. If you have questions, please let me know. I will obviously make Desiree aware of those things. She and I are working well together to make sure that we're communicating to you. If you have questions from me, I let her know. And if she has questions from assembly members, she's prompt to get those back to me and my team, and we'll respond as fast as we can. So that is all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur, and always appreciate the presentations and the work that you and your office does regarding the budget. I'm looking forward to another budget season. Any other questions or discussion from the members before we wrap things up? Okay, not hearing anything, then just a few closing comments from me. First is just to reiterate on the record. So we will be, as Mr. Wilbur stated, going into detail on the alcohol tax when we go through the department budgets, and particularly the health department budget. As I have insinuated to the members, we will likely have a separate work session after that department overview so that we can go deeper dive into it, because I think there will be interest in the members in doing so. So that's just put it on the radar there. There's likely going to be one more work session that isn't on this list that you see on the screen. Want to encourage any of the members to reach out often if you have any questions regarding the budget to the administration. And then last is for members of the public, which I think there are a few folks with us right now. You can look at this presentation and any future presentations as we receive them at muni.org/assembly, and you go to the work sessions page. All of these presentations will be put up on that website. You can also look at the full 2021 proposed budgets at the OMB website on muni.org. With that, and not seeing any further discussion, thanks again, and I'm going to go ahead and end this work session.